we have a term for it, especially right after the deal closes and they receive that lump sum of cash. It's a sudden wealth syndrome. And it's, oh my gosh, it's not that they haven't been wealthy before, right? But their bank account just hasn't had that many zeros,
right?
And they don't know what to necessarily do with it.
Most M&A content focuses on getting to a closing. This episode starts where that content ends. The founder is sold, the wire is hit, and now what? Blake and his team at Bernstein advise families through exactly that moment. His perspective on what founders misunderstand about that transition from operating income to invested wealth is something this audience will not hear anywhere else. The episode moves through 3 layers: the emotional reality of the transition, the practical mechanics of private wealth planning, and the preparation that should happen before a founder ever goes to market. There's a through line running throughout this entire episode that demonstrates something very interesting. The M&A process and the wealth management process are 2 halves of the same event, and most founders only plan for one of them. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed filming it. Great outcomes don't happen by accident. This is Closing Remarks. Today we're fortunate to have both Blake Poole and Christopher Steele, both with Bernstein Private Wealth, with us today. Blake and Christopher, could you take a moment and just introduce yourselves to our audience?
Absolutely, Dara. Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here, and we appreciate the partnership and relationship with you and with Benchmark. So Blake Poole, Managing Director. I've been with Bernstein Private Wealth Management coming up on 8 years, but I started my career in the midst of the financial crisis, where I worked for a large bulge bracket bank, before then taking some time to go work in private equity. So I was part of the 3G Capital, Berkshire Hathaway team that went into Heinz and later merged it with Kraft, and then took some time away and decided to join Bernstein about 8 years ago in our Boston office. Before moving back home, my family's from here in Central Florida, from Tampa specifically. I grew up outside of Orlando in Winter Park, but it was nice to get back home. I was sick and tired of the cold and the snow in Boston, and have been here since 2021 and have the fortunate pleasure of working closely with Christopher.
Thank you. Dara, thank you for having us. Blake, thank you for that. Christopher Steele, I'm a national director of our Institute for Trust and Estate Planning, which is a subset of our Wealth Strategies team. I joined Bernstein about 1.5 years ago after almost 13 years in private practice in the Atlanta market as a tax, trust, and estates attorney. Spent most of my time at a regional firm helping founders, helping business owners, everything from family succession, business succession, tax planning, and now I get to do all of that for our clients and friends of the firm here at Bernstein. So I've been here about 1.5 years. I'm out of our Atlanta office, but I'm down in Tampa absolutely as much as possible. I grew up in Florida as well, so anytime I can get down here is great.
We get it, for sure. A pit stop in private equity, you don't hear that very often.
Yeah, it was a crazy journey. I wanted to get my management chops underneath me, understand how to actually run a business. And so had the opportunity to move to Pittsburgh, of all places, when 3G Capital bought Heinz with Berkshire's backing. And it was an opportunity to learn strategy, run a team at an early age, understand how a company truly works and creates value. Learned a lot of mistakes, made a lot of mistakes along the way. And I don't think, that experience made me who I am today in terms of what we try to do for our clients in the private wealth space.
It makes total sense. Yeah. It's good to have a pit stop in operations.
Yeah. Quite literally a pit stop in Pittsburgh. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Very good. So today, I think the goal today is to tell a bit of a story. And my hope is that I'm going to tell that story through both of you, right? So the approach is going to be, let's start with the emotional reality, the emotional toll that a seller goes through when they go through this process. They're monetizing their life's work. That's a challenge. Then we're going to talk about private wealth, what that looks like, because it's so different than just wealth management. And most of the sellers out there, most of our clients, have never had access to private client. So we want to talk about that a bit. We'll talk about the 12 months sort of post-sale, and then we're going to go into the preparation that a seller can go through. Again, all through the lens of wealth management, We understand you're not going to go into the marketing and the operations component, not your forte, although I'm sure you've learned quite a bit in your various pit stops. So let's get back to the beginning, which is that emotional sort of reality. What do you think surprises founders the most about this transition from being in control and an active manager of one single asset, completely concentrated, to now they've done a deal, they've got a pile of cash sitting in a wire in their account, and now they're a passive investor, and they're sort of relying on income that's not generated by a business. They're not getting a salary and distributions.
Yep.
They're relying on this diversified portfolio that someone else is managing, and they're just sitting on the sidelines. What does that journey look like for them?
Yeah, it's we have a term for it, especially right after the deal closes and they receive that lump sum of cash. It's a sudden wealth syndrome. And it's, oh my gosh, it's not that they haven't been wealthy before, right? But their bank account just hasn't had that many zeros.
Right.
And they don't know what to necessarily do with it, because most of their life is spent working blood, sweat, and tears with the business and the value that they've created, right? And it's behind their family. It's the second most important asset to them. And it's an emotional journey of having everybody examine your life's work, telling you what the value is, going back and forth, negotiating over that value, and then ultimately selling it and parting ways from it. And so they might have understood what their value was in their head, what they thought their business is worth, how much money they can take from the business annually for lifestyle. But now they go to something completely different, which is from every morning at 9:30 to 4:00 in the afternoon. If the money's invested, like their net worth is marked to market every second between that period, and that's a very different thing, right? And so pulling money out for lifestyle, if markets aren't as favorable, feels even more challenging. And so that's an emotional, psychological journey that we try to educate and help our clients through. But yeah, it's we call it sudden wealth syndrome. How do I operate? This is not something that I'm used to pulling from. How do I make sense of this?
I'm stealing that. I'm going to use that. I haven't heard that before. Certainly within the context of a business owner, but you also will see it in the NBA, and you see it with lottery winners, right? It's certainly a phenomena that we've seen everywhere.
Yeah.
So do founders, sellers, do they overestimate or underestimate the stress that's generated by all of a sudden having this sudden influx of capital? This I think folks from the outside would say, wow, you've got a pile of money, but it is stressful. Just talk about how you help them navigate that.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about a framework of core versus surplus, and Christopher's team does a phenomenal job helping our clients to mention that. Do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when we approach a client or a prospect or a friend of the firm who's potentially going through an exit, first thing we try to establish is this concept that Blake mentioned of core versus surplus. Let's set aside their core. Let's make sure that the planning is done with the core and the investment is done with the core that's going to secure their legacy, secure their lifestyle. And then we can take the surplus and we can be more aggressive potentially with the surplus, or we can do more planning with the surplus. And the idea there is to try to alleviate some of that stress that comes along with, okay, now we've sold our business. Now what do we do, right? How do we manage this wealth? I think the answer to your question is they underestimate. I don't know that I've met a business owner who's ever overestimated the stress. They see the stress of running their business and growing their business as harder, and it's hard not to imagine that life will be easier on the back end of that, but it's not necessarily. And there's a lot of different stresses that go along with that. So
yeah, but by dimensioning that core capital, like if a seller is trying to understand the terms that are in front of them, if we've dimensioned that before a transaction, they know how much money they need to live their lifestyle. Anything above that, that's for the bigger boat, it's the second home, it's gifts to the family. That's some estate planning that we can help them with their trust and estate and tax counsel. So that's really where we try to bring that clarity for them, is how much do you actually need? What does your lifestyle actually cost? And that can be difficult, as you know, unraveling from the business.
Yeah. No doubt. We've seen that over and over again. You can never have a boat that's too big. They can all agree on that. That's a universal truth.
Without a doubt.
So this next question, I think it might be the most important question that I'm going to ask you today. So when a seller is selling their business, it isn't just selling a collection of assets. They're selling and monetizing their life's work. It's putting a price tag on their life's work. For a lot of them, certainly our clients, they feel like they're selling a part of their identity, their sense of purpose. And we've seen this on The Office, the American version of The Office. Hi, I'm Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration. Every time, right? I do it. Dara, Benchmark International. At some point, Bob Vance is going to sell that business. And he's just Bob Vance. Who is Bob Vance if not for the business? A lot of them sort of conflate those two, the personal identity, the business identity. And it's really hard to separate. So when you're selling a part of your identity, a part of your soul, and your sense of purpose. That's big and weighty. How do you guys help them navigate that?
Yeah, it takes time. So I make the joke here. It's kind of like for those that have been married. When you get engaged, the first thing people ask you is, when's the wedding? Right? And you're like, hold on, I just got engaged.
Right.
Can we just celebrate the fact that we've made this commitment to each other?
Right.
Right. And not focus on the wedding planning. But inevitably, when a business owner sells, the first thing people ask them is, what's next?
Yeah.
Not congratulations. Oh my gosh, this was, what an accomplishment that you did all of this. How are you dealing with it? Right. Because it's a cluster in the head, right? You're just a lot of emotions. Like, are my employees going to be taken care of? Am I still going to get invited to all of these events, right? Now that I'm not a decision maker? They maybe lose some friends over that, right? You find out who your real friends are that were just wanted to be friends with you because you were a decision maker, had power. So there's a lot of life change. And then what's next, right? Like, that is the question. And for every business owner, it's going to be different. So some of the things that we tried to do, and this is, or my wife will joke that I'm more psychologist than wealth planner, financial advisor, it is to actually sit down and talk about their values and what are their priorities in life? What are the messages, the money messages that they want to leave behind to whatever their legacy might look like, whether that's family or charity or their business. And then from that conversation, kind of stack order them and help provide that clarity so that they can think through the different mechanisms that they can use this wealth to achieve those outcomes. Right. So if it's family, working closely on estate planning, and setting up multi-generational trust or structures. If it's charitable, like, what's the right way to give money and to who? Because everyone's going to come asking you for money.
Yeah.
Right. No doubt. Right. So what's your mission? What do you really want to drive value in? But it just takes time and it takes conversation. Not everybody knows from day one what they're going to do, but it's our hope in the pre-transaction planning that we try to do with our clients is to bring a little bit of order and suss the majority of that out, knowing that some of it will inevitably change over time. But if we can help provide just a little bit more clarity, at least from day one after that transaction, there's at least some sort of plan, and we know what we're doing.
And there's a journey in having them kind of find themselves again, right? Or in the alternative, find out who they actually are aside from the business. So they may not have a personal identity. What does that timeline look like? I mean, I know it's got to be varied, but I mean, have you seen it take months, years, decades because they're actually finding themselves for the first time in their adult lives?
I think every business owner's timeline is going to look different. And what we have found is that, we can talk about some of the tools that we use. One thing that we've done that has been really helpful is putting business owners in the room with other business owners that have gone through that transaction. And that peer-to-peer learning often brings out, I think, the clarity that they're seeking, right? I'm not the only one struggling with this. This is a very normal feeling. Loneliness is the number one feeling that we get from our business owners post-transaction. What are you feeling the most right now? And it's loneliness.
Yeah.
And so if we can put them in the room with other business owners that are going through the same thing or have gone through the same thing, and what can they learn? Often that helps bring about that clarity of, what do I need my life to look like post-transaction? Anything to add to that, Christopher?
No, I think you're right. I think it varies. I think you've got some that are serial entrepreneurs. They know where they're going next. And so they create a whole new identity. Some are now making up for that time they didn't get with their families while they were building their empire. But it's definitely a process. It takes time to sit down and figure out what's important, where your priorities are. It's why we love doing our exercises with our clients, because we can kind of be part of that process. But it's different for everyone.
I love the idea of leveraging others who have been in their shoes, because they provide something that no one else can, and that's empathy. Because they've actually traveled that journey themselves, and they have their own story to tell. And I think, someone going through it for the first time, having someone else who's been there, having a room full of folks who have done this successfully and seen the other side, and maybe it took them 2 years and they're a year in and they're not forgiving themselves for finding themselves again, and they see others who've done it successfully. I think what a great idea.
And I think, as service providers, right, it's our job to give advice. And so they may recognize the advice that we're giving to them is good, but it's another thing to hear it from people that have been in their shoes and said, I didn't listen to it and I regret that, or I did listen to it and this is what here's how it helped me. Right. And so we've also found that it's helpful to have those conversations, so that people are more open to hearing other perspectives as they go into a deal.
Incredibly powerful. It's a great idea. Another one that I'm probably going to steal, but this is why we do this, right? Idea generation. The best ideas are out in the ether. Someone else created them, just grab them and repurpose them. That's always been my philosophy. Okay, so we've talked about that emotional reality. It's really a key one, I think. Now let's pivot to sort of what is private client, and how does that sort of meld with that journey they're going through? So I think a lot of people who own businesses have a wealth manager. That's not foreign to them. Private wealth is very different. There's a suite of services that are not available to them. Now, all of a sudden, it opens a lot of doors. Can you just talk about what private wealth actually is?
Sure. Look, yes, I think you're right. A lot of business owners have somebody that maybe helps them with their 401k plan, or saving some money aside in an IRA or a 529 plan, and doing some basic planning. But at this level of wealth, it's not so much like what questions should I ask? It's what questions am I not asking, right? What's the experience at my level of wealth that I need to be aware of? Because most of these clients, most of these business owners are creating generational wealth. And so what structures, do I need to put in place that reflect my values? And so when it comes to private wealth, I think that's what it is. Look, I think we do a heck of a job investing. We wouldn't manage nearly $900 billion if we didn't have a great investment track record, and our competition wouldn't use our portfolios inside their client portfolios if we weren't good at doing our investing job.
The subtle flex there.
Right. But what I would say is where we are exceptional is in that planning. It's Christopher's team that really helps answer those questions, and how we can help them plan so that if they want to pass on wealth to charity, if they want to pass on wealth to their family, how can we do that the most tax efficiently to them and meet their goals? And that's a lot of complex work, and not everybody is staffed up for that. And that's where I think, Christopher, you could talk a little bit about the wealth strategies team and how you approach. That's what separates in my mind, the true private wealth kind of boutique family office style service from the competition, which might be more mass retail.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think at the advisor level, advisors become more counselors. They're getting to know their clients. They're understanding their priorities. They're spending more time with them, as opposed to just somebody who's managing the investments, and that's it. Couple that with the resources. So I think of it as advisors, counselors, and then the resources. On the private wealth side, having teams like our wealth strategies team, we've got 50 people. We service 260 advisors, right? Anytime they need someone from our group, we're there. Jump on a plane, get on a call, whatever they need. If it's a will issue, a trust issue, a family succession issue, but we've also got other teams. It's these other resources that we can bring to bear that I think helps them solve their pain points. So the counselor and the advisor helps them identify the issues if they don't know what questions they're not asking. And then they have the ability to bring in these resources to help solve those problems. And we don't do the work. I don't get to draft anymore. That was part of the joy of taking this job. But we get to be the resource to come in, to talk through ideas, to talk through pain points, and then get them where they need to be to take those off their list and move forward.
And I'd say, it doesn't just stop with money and planning, right? Clients come to us and say, like, I've had this they trust us, right? We're dealing with one of the most intimate parts of their life, which is their money. Like, how many of us have shown our bank accounts to our best friends? Most listeners, most of us here would probably put our hands down, right? If we were to ask people to raise hands, they end up asking us other questions. Like, I've got this medical issue. Who do you trust in medicine? So working with concierge medicine. Hey, I worried about cybersecurity in my teenagers. Who do you have that can help me think through this? Or, hey, I thinking about buying a private plane. What do I do? Right. So it's become more than just investing and wealth planning. There's a lot of complexity in these individuals' lives, and helping them make sense of it.
It's almost a concierge service where you own that client relationship and you become the clearinghouse for almost every major decision they make in their life, which is where you want to be as an advisor. That's the person you want to be.
We're usually the first phone call. Hey, I've got this idea or this problem. Who do you know? Right. And it's being that connector and that facilitator and having vetted solutions that we trust with our clients. It brings a lot of comfort to these families.
And for you, it creates high switching costs, like really a sticky relationship. And it's just hard for them to leave, which is great, especially when you deliver good returns.
Correct.
It helps. Okay. So I'm going to predict I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You're going to say the earlier, the better. But in an M&A transaction, when's the ideal time for you to be looped into the transaction?
I mean, look, we say we want to be involved 2 to 3 years in advance. That doesn't always happen that way. But that's what we want, because that's where we do the best value. You want to talk about like your experience in private practice?
Yeah. The earlier the better is kind of the go-to answer, right? But the earlier that we can get in, and especially my team, the Wealth Strategies team, and start talking about corporate structure, talking about family structure, making sure they've got everything lined up the right way, the easier it is to go through the transaction. When they get to the point where the transaction is now in full discussion, or we get to a stage where there's discussions with a potential buyer, the entrepreneur is already, the way I look at it, the entrepreneur is already running, 100 miles an hour running the business. They're taking whatever little tiny bits of time they can spare and spending it with their family, and probably not enough. Now you tack on the potential sale of a business and the stress that comes with that and all the extra demands on their time. Trying to get the estate planning done and the tax planning and the business succession planning done on top of that list is near impossible. And so the earlier, frankly, it's a matter of when can we get some time and their attention. And the further that is, in my opinion, out before the transaction's on the table, the better. It also, there's all of the techniques that we use to get assets out of taxable estates and all those things. Time matters. Having that gap between doing the work and the transaction is important. But I find it's actually getting the time and the attention of the entrepreneur that's really most critical. We can't recommend a good structure that fits for their family if we don't have time to sit down and understand their family.
And what I'd say to that is we consider ourselves the investment banker of the personal balance sheet. It's not how much money you get to keep in a transaction, it's not how much money you make in a transaction, it's how much money you get to keep, right? And so what can we, while you optimize the value of the business and corporate attorneys help negotiate the terms and accountants make sure everything's money's is where they say it is. How can we optimize that personal balance sheet, keeping in mind their goals and their vision, but also because we know that tax hit after the deal is closed is pretty massive. So how can we minimize that? So the more time that we have before to figure all of this out, we can really help maximize deal value on an after-tax basis.
So the logical next question is, and I'm going to key in only on sort of structure and tax optimization in the deal. When is it too late for you guys to make an impact from a tax perspective? Again, you guys can come in at the end, deal's done, there's a pool of cash, you can manage it.
Yeah.
And you're a safe set of hands. Great. That's a service and it's awesome. But at what point in the deal is it too late for you to do anything to the structure or to maximize, or is there not a point like that?
Yeah, I think there is, 3 distinct timeframes. It's pre-transaction, during the transaction, and post-transaction. Look, there's tools that we can use in all 3 stages, but the most effective tools are pre. And so what we really try to stress to our clients is like, look, here's what's available to you pre-transaction. Let's talk about that now. But during the transaction, there are things that we can think about, especially as deal terms start to come to light. And then post-transaction, depending on, again, goals or, family or what they plan to do next, then we can optimize on that side of it. But I think the biggest ROI, Christopher, correct me if you think
100%
is definitely going to be on that pre-transaction side.
It is. I had the joy of a couple of times in private practice getting a phone call on a Thursday or Friday afternoon with a client saying, hey, I need your help. I need to do some planning. Great. When are you selling your business? Well, we close on Monday.
Yeah, right.
Call me on Tuesday. There also comes a point where if you try to force too much planning on the front end and you're too close to the deal itself gets disrupted. And we never want to disrupt the deal. I don't want to delay a closing or anything else because we want to stick a trust in or change an ownership structure. That's a big mistake.
Right.
Don't let the tax tail wag the dog, right? So
It's like Amazon putting an obstacle in their shopping cart. I mean, we would probably shoo you away at that point and say, we'll bring you in right after. It's a bit late to mess with the structure.
that's exactly right. So to Blake's point, the tools that are available pre-transaction for doing things as far as estate tax, mitigation and things like that are much more robust on the front end, but they take time. And so if we get to a point with a client where a deal is imminent, whether it's under LOI or even the purchase and sale agreement's already being negotiated, we're probably going to look at more of those options that are in the deal structure where we might get some tweaks done right at the last minute without disrupting the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to revisit it post-closing because we do not want to disrupt the deal. That's obviously the most important thing. Buyers get real concerned when last minute there's changes in ownership and all these things. We don't want any of that. So the short answer is there is a point where it becomes, let's put a pause in it and let's look at the back end. That varies, depends on the deal, depends on the buyer, depends on where the deal is going. But typically, I would say as far as pre-transaction planning going, when we're at an LOI, between the LOI and the signing of the purchase and sale agreement, now we're getting in a really danger zone. So we try to get things done long before that LOI comes to the table. It's not to say that we can't do some things in that area, but the options are limited.
No, makes sense. So first 12 months after a transaction, the seller's world is flipped on its head. And we talked a little bit about this, but in most cases, a seller has 90 to 95% of their net worth, their assets concentrated in a single investment. And now it's a diversified pool of assets. We talked about the emotional toll there. Let's talk about ceding control. These are type A personalities, and now they're passive. They're letting other guys, or ostensibly you guys, manage their money, and they're shaking. They're shaking because they've never ceded control of anything to anybody. Talk about that a bit.
Are they always passive? I feel like especially that first month after, they're not so passive, but yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think we talk about this in investing or wealth planning. Like there's only two things that we can control. We control our spending and we can control our asset allocation. And so we focus on both, right? The spending part really requires a lot of transparency. Like I joked that, and it's a true story. I actually did have a business owner who became a client who complained about paying toll roads after. It's like, I never had to pay toll roads before because he ran it through his business, right? All these added costs that he never thought of.
He has a Lambo budget, but he worried about tolls. Yeah.
But then the asset allocation, like that part is trickier because it's a lot of education, right? Because again, most business owners don't really spend as much time in the markets as we do. Just they're focused on selling their widget or their service or whatever it may be that they've created a ton of value with. And so we have to educate them on here's the risk and reward with each of these asset classes and the investment vehicles you can use inside those asset classes. And so, you start out from a place of going back to the core surplus is, hey, if we know that we can take very little risk with your core bucket and be okay, do you want to try to be more aggressive with your surplus? Right? Like that's one strategy. Because a lot of these clients that have sold their business successfully, it's they have the privilege of deciding how much risk they want to take versus they need to take. Because boy, do we have some clients that spend like, drunken pirates, and we've got to increase that risk to keep up with their spending, but that comes at the expense of volatility. But if you're in that fortunate space where you've done extremely well, you may not need to take as much wealth to accomplish your goals, or not take them at risk to accomplish your goals. Sorry. So that's what I would say. And so we spend a lot of time coming from the educational space of what is an investment? What are these investments? What are the trade-offs? What are the return potentials? And what happens in down markets? Like, that's the most important, because the worst thing that we can do is make a massive strategy change, sell at a bottom, right, and really lose a lot of value. And so how do we help there?
Well, and I think that's one thing that we do well is that education piece. It helps the entrepreneur who's gone from that active role to that semi-passive role, who feels a little less in control, to understand what's going on, to be part of the process. It's not simply they drop their check off at the office and never, don't get any part of the decision making. I mean, it really is an education process. We're spending a lot of time with them to make sure they're involved in helping with the decision. It's not completely hands off by any stretch.
I like the use of semi-passive. I actually had a pretty one-sided conversation with my guy last week, where I look at the treasury auction market as insight into how in the world of global, like, sovereign nations who invest in treasuries, and institutional investors who are very smart and have the best and brightest, at their fingertips, what their view is of the full faith and credit of the United States and our solvency going forward. And when treasury auctions don't go so well, and we've had a couple in a row that didn't go so well, I view that as maybe time to pump the brakes. And I had a very active conversation with my guy last week that supposed to be about a half an hour, went about 2 hours. So I can certainly empathize with your plight there. I was on the other side of it. I was the not so passive investor in that case. So at the same time, when their world is flipped, they're now in a really vulnerable and emotional state. You also introduce these asset classes that are alternatives that they've never probably interacted with. We're talking about hedge and private equity and venture. These are things they've maybe heard of, but have no idea what they are. You can't mark them to market. Well, you can. It's really, really hard. You can't do it effectively. So I'm curious what, when they're at their most vulnerable, at least financially in their mind, and now you're trying to explain to them these really complicated asset classes that are at their disposal now they can actually utilize. How does that conversation go?
Yes. So again, I think coming from an educational perspective, right? When we think about private market exposure, right, and I would say the bus has left on calling it alternative asset classes, right? Like, it's really about private versus public market exposure. One, it's about who is it right for, and what problem does it solve? So when we think about these private market solutions, whether it's private credit, or it's in the headlines a lot right now, or hedge funds and private equity, is what are we trying to solve for? Like, what is the problem that our client is experiencing? Maybe it's income. So maybe we need to think about some private market income generating ideas. Maybe it's they want a little bit more appreciation, and they've got the time horizon to take on that illiquidity. But it's all about sizing it based on what's the appropriate risk that we want to take in this client's portfolio. So there's not like a magic answer that it needs to be 25% of the allocation for each client. It's also taking into consideration what's still on their balance sheet. Like, this, but a lot of deals that we're seeing have earnouts, right, of rolled equity. And we have to take that into consideration in terms of private market exposure. What happens if the client doesn't get their earned equity, or their earnout, in their rolled equity? And so we have to think about the holistic balance sheet. If somebody's a real estate developer, probably not going to recommend
like REITs.
Yeah. So where is their exposure, right? And then what's their goal? So who is it right for, and what problem does it solve? And then again, it's a lot of education. Right. I think a lot of what you're seeing in the headlines right now, specifically in private credit with some of these more retail funds, is that I don't think that they were explained appropriately.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right.
And so if we can educate clients and talk to them about like our unique structure, our unique investments, and what their track record looks like, what's the illiquidity, what are the fees, what are the risks,
redemption.
Right. And it's a big way. You're right. And it's sizing in terms of their total portfolio, their total balance sheet. It brings a lot more comfort of making the decision whether we want to put it in the portfolio or not.
So I want to juxtapose a couple of notions here. So you hinted at a couple of these earlier. So people are going to come after these guys, right? And I don't want to say they're vultures, but when you have a pool of capital, it's usually publicized. There's a press release. The folks are going to come at them with investment opportunities, and they're going to fashion themselves potentially as, hey, I'm an angel investor now. Well, that's a very difficult thing. I was a VC for 10 years. It's not easy to be good at it. I don't know that I would. I did it for a long time. So I think that's a challenge. There are also people who like to actively manage. So there's maybe a tendency to potentially want to write a big check and get back into the game. So how do you save them from themselves? Is that a big part of your job, trying to save them from their own instincts?
I think each client's different, right? But I think this is where you start to uncover, what is it they want to accomplish after the transaction. And if we've done our job correctly, that core capital component here is critically important, right? Because what we want to make sure is that they've preserved enough money that if anything they do outside of that core capital goes wrong or they lose value, that they're at least going to be okay for the rest of their life. And so that surplus capital is the client want to use it to do some venture investing or invest in their buddy's company, a real estate deal, maybe buy a few horses up in Kentucky. Hey, go for it. You've got that surplus capital. That's what this money's here for. Right? Let's just make sure that we ring fence that core capital and that you're going to be okay if all of those things go south. All those,
which they certainly can. Yeah.
We have seen that happen. We definitely have a few clients who unfortunately have not listened to our advice, right? And it did not go the way that they thought that it would go.
That's great. So we've, just to sort of summarize where we are now. So we've talked about sort of that emotional journey. We've defined private wealth and how that kind of fits in and how it's additive to the process. We talked about sort of that first 12 months after. Let's kind of circle back to that preparation that business owner can do in advance. What would you recommend they do? This is an action or a series of actions 2 years in advance of a sale and even 1 year in advance of a sale.
So I'll give one thing and I'll let Christopher give another thing. Yeah. So what I'd say is assemble your team. You want to have your team in place that you're ready to go through this life-changing experience with. So who's your M&A advisor? Right? Who's your corporate attorney? Who's your trust and estate attorney? Who's your accountant? And who's your private wealth manager? Now, there could be other services that are in there, like maybe you have a consultant that helps you, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a ton of other, and I'm definitely leaving out a few other service providers that can be exceptionally relevant during times like this. But who's your team, and do they know each other? Do they work well with each other? Do they each know their lane? Because
that's key.
Believe it or not, I do know that there's some of us out there, and I say us, wealth managers out there who try to act like an investment banker.
Yeah.
That's not our role. We need to know our lane. What can we provide? So I'd say is assemble a team, make sure everybody understands the goal and is communicating freely, so that the corporate side of the transaction is taken care of, as well as the personal side.
Blake, you stole mine. That was going to be mine too.
It was so good.
It was great. I want to emphasize the communication piece, making sure they're all working together and rowing in the same direction. I can't tell you how many times when I was in private practice, a financial advisor or a CPA or an insurance agent, they're moving in one direction, they're taking the lead on something and nobody else knows about it. And that creates all kinds of issues. So picking the right team, vetting your team, make sure you got the right professionals around you, I think is by far number one. If I had to come up with a 1B or a number 2, it's getting your personal house in order.
Yeah.
Right. This, we run across clients all the time that think they're ready to sell. And so much of it is in their head and not on paper, or their books aren't in order, their house isn't in order. They've put off all of the things they can put off while they're charging ahead. And now suddenly those things are going to come back to haunt them if they don't get them in order. And so that can be everything from the business itself and the books and records of the business. It could be their personal affairs, whatever the case may be. Get your house in order so that you're ready to go into this incredibly stressful and difficult period of trying to run a business and sell a business, because that's not easy.
Yeah, and trying to go through that process, an M&A process, when you haven't done that work on the front end, you're doing them simultaneously. It's so easy to take your foot off the gas and your eye off the ball. We've seen it, right? And it's a heavy lift on the front end. We ask a lot. We need access to a lot of information. And if it's in disparate spots, living in brains, not in systems and in processes, it's a real challenge. And now you have some real risk of catastrophe, because now you're focusing on building for an M&A process versus running your business, right? It's got to be a side hustle. The M&A process has to be a side hustle. It can't be your primary job unless you hire someone internally to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what separates those who transition really well from those who don't, right? So is it having great advisors? Is it having great preparation? Is it their mindset? Is it luck? Is it some combination of all of them? Is it something I haven't thought of entirely?
When you say transition, do you mean
From business ownership to
yeah.
being just a passive investor, just sitting back and enjoying the ride?
Yeah, I'd say from my experience, and Christopher, feel free to have a different experience. It's those that have passions outside of their business, whether it could be family, it could be a hobby, it could be travel, right? It's those that have some idea of what it is that they want to spend time with after that. I think the business owner that hasn't spent so much of their life in the business and hasn't built that connectivity with peers or their community probably tends to struggle the most, because all of that world goes away. Like, they stop getting invited to their employees' weddings. They stop getting invited to their employees' children's birthdays. Like, the attorneys are no longer calling them. The accountants are no longer calling them. Their email isn't blowing up the way that it used to.
Right.
So it's that sense of loneliness, right? So what I'd say is, ones that transition well, even if they maybe don't know what they want to do exactly right away, but they've built some kind of connection to the community that they can spend some time on while they figure out what it is that's next.
If they don't know, my wife has a lot of ideas. She comes to me regularly with all the things she wants to do once I do retire. I'm not even 53 yet. I've got some gas left in the tank, guys, but at some point, I guess it'll happen. And she's got that planned out, that last 70 or 80 years of my life after I retire, which it would take that long to get through her list. So maybe that's a business I can stand up and have her be a consultant.
Absolutely.
For your clients who don't know what they want to do when they grow up and go beyond their business. So every guest at the end of the podcast gets the opportunity to stop talking about what's happened, what's transpired, and instead impart their wisdom. These will be your closing remarks. I know, it's incredibly clever. Name of the show. Right. So what's the one thing you believed early in your career that you no longer believe today?
And I'm going to reference my career in private practice. Obviously, I've been with Bernstein only a short period of time, but when I came out of school, I believed that most situations could be solved with the right planning technique or the right section of the trust code. I still believe some of that. But as I've gotten to know my clients over the years, and now Bernstein clients that I get to work with, I truly believe spending the time to get to know them, to solve their family issues, is so much more important than saving a little bit of tax or having the right trust structure. They're all important.
Yeah.
But it's the values, the priorities, that's so much more important than all of the techniques and the tools and the savings. And so that's probably where I've kind of evolved to at this point in time. It's the touchy-feely part that's so critical to get all of the rest of it right and solve those issues.
Yeah, these are people, they want to feel heard, right? Of course. Makes sense. Like,
So for me, I'd say it's that those successful individuals that we see in life have done it all on their own. And it's not true. It takes a village. It takes a team. Nobody got to where they got to without the help of others. And I think very early on in my career, I romanticized that, oh, look at this person, like, so successful, that's where I'm headed, and didn't realize all of the help that they were given. Same with clients, right? These clients have been extremely successful. They didn't get here on their own. They maybe had an idea but they had a lot of others, their employees, their advisors, helping them get to where they got to. And so, and I've seen that time and time again. We didn't talk at all about like deals that failed, but more often than not, the deals that do fail is where the client or the business owner tried to do it themselves,
Right.
and didn't have a team around them to help them. And so, I used to think that way, probably very naive right out of college. But the reality is that I'm not, I would not be as successful as I am if I didn't have people like Christopher or other team members that helped me to get to where I am today.
Some of the smartest clients I've ever had were very much aggressive in leaning on us as an advisor. They were, again, Thomas Fry, Silex options trading platform. We sold that business a number of years ago. One of the smartest humans I've ever met, high functioning. And he knew he didn't understand M&A, and he needed to find an advisor who could really help him execute, and allowed him to be Superman on everything else. Right. And, it's the folks who really understand their limitations better, because their limitations are, they're up there, but they exist, are the ones who I think get the most value. So it makes all the sense in the world. So there'll be a lot of business owners and their spouses listening today. What would you want to say to them before the most important financial event of their life?
I think my answer is going to be surrounding yourself with the right people. We talked about it earlier, that process early on of choosing the right advisors. There's a lot of wrong advisors out there. And I don't mean just in the financial world. There's plenty in the legal world as well that are giving bad advice. And it's sometimes hard to know what's good and what's bad, but you can vet those individuals. You can get to know them. You can make sure they understand your family and the communication lines are open, and build out that team around you to help you go through this process. I think that's where I would go.
I think Christopher's spot on. What I'd add to it is start to think about, what does this wealth mean to you? Wealth and money creates a ton of stress in people's lives. Even if you're extremely rich, that money is bringing some sort of stress to you. How do I communicate with my kids? How do I communicate with my spouse about it? Do my friends think differently of me? And what am I going to ultimately use all of this wealth for? And so I think the more you can start to think about, what does it mean to you, and what do you want it to accomplish in your life, the better you will handle that transition.
It's a great answer. I love how you guys worked off of each other. It's like you are.
We've done this as spouses.
Yeah, it's not going to be our spouse.
Occasionally you've worked off.
We drive the same truck. We both cheer for the Alligators. There's a lot of similarities. We
I love it.
like to shoot clays and fish. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities here.
I've shot clay with Blake here, and I'd advise against it unless you're good at it. And I was not.
Yeah, no. Look, you more practice.
Yeah, I need to get back out there. So my brother-in-law is pushing me to buy a shotgun.
Yeah.
That
happens.
Apparently, I'm now a Southern gentleman. I need to have a shotgun. So I will probably do that at some point soon. I might even leverage your abilities there to help pick one out too. Well, great. So Blake Poole is the managing director at Bernstein's Tampa office. He works primarily with business owners and families navigating the complexity that comes with significant wealth. Blake is a fifth-generation Floridian, Harvard Kennedy School graduate, and one of the more thoughtful advisors I know. Blake and Christopher, thank you for joining us. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. And remember, in business and in life, the best outcomes are built, not found.